We need to understand that children in poverty are under a lot of stress, children divorced, children who are yelled at, children who are mistreated cannot learn.
When a child is under attack, under stress, there's a release of cortisol. When there is a release of cortisol and then adrenaline, it is chemically impossible for brain cells. Remember, the job of the brain is to memorize information and to apply it. It is chemically impossible when there is cortisol in the brain for brain cells to absorb new information. So a child who is living with stress and fear cannot learn until the sense of safety and love has been returned back to that child.
I had a real epiphany with a case that I prosecuted now quite a number of years ago.
I had a small child in one of my classrooms. He was 4 years old.
We had a little girl last year who, when she came to us, her father was in prison.
In 1994, a Hampton police officer named Kenny Wallace was shot to death. He was murdered one night while he was on duty by 3 people, 1 an adult and 2 teenagers. And the evidence showed in that case that the 14-year-old stood over Officer Wallace as he was dying after having already been shot by the adult, stood over him, emptied his gun into the car, and laughed.
One day I documented whelps on his back, and then the next day I documented cigarette burns on his hands. And immediately had to call CPS, immediately. I had no choice.
Her mother had abandoned her on drugs with a drug problem. She had not developed any relationships with peers or with adults. She was very violent and out of control when we got her. She had been molested.
His mother was a crack addict who was not much older than he was. I mean, she was not much more than a child herself. She was a prostitute. She prostituted herself to feed her addiction. And he lived with her in his earliest years and witnessed beatings by her customers, was himself sold for drugs, and essentially had no guidance, no assistance, no love, no caring, no nothing.
This child happened to be a child of a migrant family. So as soon as CPS stepped on that door, he disappeared. I never saw him again.
It just brought home to me in a really horrific way what happens to these kids who are throwaways. They're going to end up in the system at some point. And at 14, you know, that young man, there wasn't much left for him.
I really wanted to reach that family and maybe give the parents some strategies on how to deal with this 4-year-old, but he was gone, just like that.
One doesn't like to ever think there's no redemption for anybody, but I don't see much opportunity for him. But it's because of where he came from that he turned out that way.
I don't know where this child will be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but in my head and in my heart, I do believe we've made a difference. And I think many children are in situations that they can't help themselves. And yet, if we're there for them, we are going to make a difference.
I grew up the youngest of 7 children in York County. And when we were children, we would sometimes go on picnics to the battlefields down there. Now, I'm a lot younger than my siblings, about 7 years younger than my youngest brother. And one day we were all kind of climbing around on the battlefields down there, and my mom had laid out a spread of food for us, and my mom's going, "All right, come eat, come eat." And so, you know, 7 kids, we all look at each other. It's a foot race to get to the food. And so everybody takes off running, and I'm clearly lagging behind in the tall grass, being that much younger than everyone else. And my father, who built a little bit like me, which is not for speed, looks back and sees that I'm falling behind. Now, I'm sure he was hungry too, and he could have run on ahead of and gotten to the food, but instead he reached his hand back and took my hand in his and pulled me along faster than I ever could have by myself gotten across that field. And so got me to the food, and we all shared in the picnic. And that's sort of the situation we find ourselves with children, which is, are we so concerned with getting to the picnic, of getting to our prize at the end, that we don't have time to look back and see that there's a small child falling behind us? And just a little bit of effort of putting our hands back and slowing our pace down just a little bit and making that sacrifice can pull a child along and get them somewhere they never would have gotten to, or get them there more quickly than they ever would have on their own.
Our job is not to shield the child from the world and its diamonds and rust, but rather to equip the child with the resolve and the fortitude and the strength and mindset to carry on and do good and do well despite it all.
I want to be a firefighter, pizza man, a doctor, Thomas the Train, a football player. I'll be a police girl, a doctor, a super top.
When I was 12 years old and I was asked what I wanted to be, I basically said I wanted to save the world. And I really thought that was possible, that we could change everything. And I feel that excited about what's happening in Virginia right now. It is possible for us to change Virginia's world for young children in 6 years.
I tell you what, I may not be able to save the world, but we'll save a lot of kids here in Norfolk, I can tell you that.
10 years down the road, I'd like to see teachers better trained, teachers better paid, teachers better compensated with benefits. You know, but that's a dream.
We're hoping for utopia here, right?
Economists have really been great advocates for investing in early childhood, because they have been the ones to say that in terms of economic development, they have a hard time finding any better investment.
Where do you get the bigger bang for the buck? Putting educational dollars in a child from age 4 to 5 or age 17 to 18?
Business leaders play an important role in the whole issue around early childhood development and children in general. For me to have a motivated, productive group of associates working at Capital One, they need to have their issues around how to raise their children and know that their children are well cared for. As a business leader, if I can invest in what's the right answer for their children, then I'm investing in keeping them in my workforce as well, and we're in a virtuous cycle.
A $1 investment in high-quality early care and education can yield a 16% compounded annual inflation-adjusted rate of return just on that investment. There are that many factors that are impacted long-term in the high-quality early care and education, and that is a number. That is lower retention rates, higher graduation rates, less use of public welfare, less teen pregnancy, less drug abuse, higher incomes, lower incarceration rates. The data is phenomenal in the breadth of the impact that high quality early care and education can have. So not only are they focused on their future workforce and making sure that we maximize the number of highly skilled workers, they're saying, well, we know for our current workforce, high quality care and finding accessible and affordable high quality care is a big issue for our current workforce.
The payoff is not immediate, and so it's a long-term investment, and sometimes it's difficult to convince people to be patient and to look for the long-term outcome, that you're not going to see a benefit overnight.
For every child we spend $1 on at the elementary and high school age, we spend 4 cents on a toddler in state and federal funds. Well, yeah, you don't want to just throw money to solve a problem, but throwing no money at it certainly is not going to help the problem either.
I mean, you're going to pay the money up front, or you're going to pay the money later. And if you pay the money later, which is when they're in the juvenile justice system or the adult criminal system, you're going to pay a lot more money than you're going to pay at the front end.
We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. But that's really the truth when we look at the issues around early childhood education. No one group or organization can solve the problems. We can't expect the school divisions to be the group that solves the early childhood problems. We can't expect the government to take it on. It has to be a public-private partnership.
You might just ask yourself, what is it that I can do to make sure that our children in this community start off from the earliest days of life geared for success. It'll benefit them and it'll benefit the whole area and the whole Commonwealth.
Being a father of a preschool child, I'd like to say to parents out there that you need to get active.
We need to begin to ask the hard questions of our policymakers, and we've got to start demanding early care and education for our youngest citizens.
That early education, that early learning is essential to turn on those switches for all that those children have been born with in their brains. They are born ready to learn, and we within the community have the opportunity to provide those experiences and stimulations.
Read, 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 read to your children. Make sure that you have books, 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 books in your home, and also let your children see you reading.
If we invest in children now, we won't lose another generation.
There's a lot at stake for all of us, whether we're parents or not, and so I would encourage people to continue to educate themselves, to talk about this. And when I meet with groups, what I say is, you keep talking about it, and public awareness is going to grow. And those parents that haven't yet gotten the message about the importance of early childhood education will hear about it, and they'll start seeking the opportunities. This is the way we do it in a democracy.
We prefer our children's future to our present. I would argue that's fundamental to our sense of democracy.
Investment in human capital, that's the secret. That's the secret of the American experiment. And our investment in the early childhood care and education of our very, very youngest citizens is the thing that will save our country.